Joining us now, I'm delighted he's with us, Congressman Jeff Duncan, Republican, South Carolina. He's a member of the Homeland Security and Foreign Affairs Committees, and he joins us now. Congressman, good to talk to you.
Well, Laura, thanks so much for having me on this day where we remember 9/11, but we also do not forget what happened in Benghazi.
Well, as the Homeland Security Committee member that you are, let's start with Benghazi and the fact that we have no one in custody a year later, despite the president's pledge that justice will be done, perpetrators will be brought to justice. We have charges filed, yet the man who the administration concluded was present at the attacks, might have spearheaded the attack on our mission there, on our compound there. He has not been brought into custody, despite the fact that he was interviewed by CNN, the New York Times, and a number of other journalists over the years. Over the last year.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that there's so many unanswered questions. No one's been brought to justice in spite of the harsh rhetoric of the president on 9/12 last year, saying someone would be brought to justice. The fact that they can be so conclusive about what happened in Syria with the Assad regime and the chemical weapons, but yet we had eyes in the sky with the Predator drone. We had so many people on the ground the night of September 11th a year ago in Benghazi, but yet we haven't brought anyone to justice. It's amazing to me that we can have all this information about what went on in Syria, but yet they won't identify it as a terrorist attack in Benghazi.
You had a fiery exchange with John Kerry at the Syria hearing, the other day, and this was a hearing ostensibly about whether we should have military action in Syria. Yet you asked the Benghazi question, and John Kerry's response was basically, we're moving forward as we move forward, and
the same administration that was seemingly so quick to involve the U.S. in Syria now was reluctant to use the same resources at its disposal to attempt to rescue the 4 brave Americans that fought for their lives in Benghazi.
We're talking about people being killed by gas, and you want to go talk about Benghazi.
Absolutely want to talk about Benghazi because 4 Americans lost their lives. I have sympathy for the people in Syria, and I do think there should be a worldwide response, but we should act cautiously.
I've got to say, of all the exchanges at that hearing with Kerry, that was one of the better exchanges, and I want to applaud you. We do a lot to highlight the deficiency in some of the GOP leaders and the establishment versus the people theme on this show, but that you were speaking for the people there, and I just want to say thank you for doing that, Congressman.
Well, thanks, Laura, and I held up at that hearing a picture that was given me by Mr. Charles Woods, Tyrone Woods' father. That's a picture that's taped to the computer screen in front of me today that I see every day when I walk in my office, and that's Ty Woods, a Navy SEAL that was working in Benghazi, former Navy SEAL, that was fighting for his life on that rooftop when the Islamists walked the mortar rounds into the rooftop to kill him and Glenn Doherty, that were fighting to hopefully maybe protect the ambassador. They had no idea the status of Chris Stevens at that point in time. But 4 individuals, 4 Americans lost their lives in Benghazi, and this administration tried to mislead the American people afterwards. They continued not to answer the questions, continued to shelter 30 survivors that need to be brought before Congress to answer the questions of my colleague Trey Gowdy, who is a prosecutor who can ask the right questions and can find out the answers to what went on in Benghazi, what was going on that night, and why the administration continues to thwart the efforts to find the answers out for guys like Charles Woods that visited with me and provided me the picture of his son.
Well, John Kerry was positively indignant in response to your question. He said, we don't deserve to drag this into yet another Benghazi discussion when the real issue here is whether or not Congress is going to stand up for international norms with respect to dictators that have only been broken twice until Assad, Hitler and Saddam Hussein. So he wants to change the subject back to Syria, and he says, you're dragging this into Benghazi. And he that was about as indignant as I think he got that particular day.
Yeah, I got under his skin a little bit, but, I told him that Benghazi was germane to Syria. that many Americans believed that what was going on in Benghazi was an effort to round up the weapons that we had given the Libyan rebels to try to get them in the hands of the Syrian rebels. And the bigger picture is there are no good guys in Syria. There is no good side to fall on. You've either got Assad and Russia and Iran and Hezbollah, or you've got Al-Qaeda and all the other Islamist terrorist cells, 1,200 different groups that are fighting in that revolution and that civil war there. So there are no good guys for us to line up with here.
We're talking to Jeff Duncan of South Carolina, Congressman on the Homeland Security Committee, of course, and also the Budget Committee. When you heard the president last night speak to the nation, and he made the case, many say a moral case, for going into Syria, and also at the same time he said we're going to wait to see what diplomatic solutions might come to the fore. But when he made that moral case, was that powerful for you, given the photos and the videos that we've seen of the victims of the chemical weapon attack?
Well, no one on the Hill is really denying the fact that chemical weapons were used in Syria, and there's a lot of sympathy for what went on there. And I do believe that the world needs to have a response toward the Assad regime at some point. But Laura, it's been 21 days. What is the sense of urgency here? Why not build a case in the court of popular opinion, global popular opinion, and get some of the other signatory countries? I think there's 189 signatory countries to the Convention on the Use of Chemical Weapons. Why not get them to align with the United States? What's the sense of urgency to act unilaterally and have a military strike in Syria? Why not a blockade? Why not economic sanctions against Assad? Why not other things that we can do before we put men and women, folks like Ty Woods, that are serving this country, put them in harm's way in someone else's civil war? I think Americans are speaking loudly to their representatives here in Congress, and I think congressmen are speaking loudly. Let's proceed cautiously. Let's see if there's other avenues. But this really bodes to a failure in foreign policy. I don't believe the administration has a clear, concise foreign policy. When John Kerry makes just a haphazard statement, Vladimir Putin jumped on that. That shows real leadership on Putin's part and the lack of leadership in the administration.
We're talking to Jeff Duncan of South Carolina. And Congressman, on the issue of immigration, I must ask you about this because there are other substantive policy questions on the table, and certainly many on the left and some of your colleagues want you all to get to conference with the Senate and hope for the best, hope something good comes out of this. And I can tell you from the standpoint of most of my listeners, we think this is just a colossal waste of time, given the motivations of the left, what they've already said, what they've already demanded, and new demands already being put on the table by people who've been in this country illegally, and what they're demanding for those who've already been deported, namely this Dream 9, which I'm sure you saw last week. They now demand that those who have been deported also are allowed to come back as part of some grand immigration reform bargain.
Yeah, listen, the Senate bill is a non-starter with me, and we're trying to work to push our leadership. My understanding is we'll never pass something that could be conference with the Senate bill because the Senate bill is bad. So we don't need to bring that up. I've said all along, let's secure the border. A 2006 Secure Fenced Act was a great start as the law of the land, but it's not being enforced by the administration. Secure the border until we stop the hemorrhaging. Every other conversation is a conversation to be had sometime down the road. We've got to secure the border first. And so once we do that, then I think we have to have a conversation about the visa overstays. Roughly 41 to 49% of all illegals in this country didn't walk across our southern border. They may have come through an airport. They had a permission slip or a visa to come into this country, and they decided to stay. We know who they are. They had an interview in the consulate. They probably have their picture and thumbprint. We know their last known address. That's low-hanging fruit. Let's enforce the laws that are in the books, and let's go after the ones that have overstayed their visa and send those guys home. That takes care of roughly half the problem.
Well, now it looks like there are about 18 to 20 million. I mean, the Border Patrol Union, representing tens of thousands of the men and women on the ground actually doing this work, or that are supposed to be doing this work when they're not called to stand down by the administration, they say this number is completely underestimated. And I've always said that 11 million was just, and that's a joke. It's probably double that and growing.
Yeah, and the other thing to think about is the what they dub as OTMs, other than Mexicans that have come into this country. I've talked to security forces on the King Ranch in Texas and others that say, they're apprehending not just the Hispanics that are held out as the epitome of the immigration issue. They're catching Africans, Middle Eastern, and Asian folks that have come across our southern border, and they're catching them in Kingsville, Texas, or Corpus Christi. They're not right at the border. What are they coming here for? What are the Middle Easterns coming here for? That's a national security issue that is lost in the debate about.
They don't care. They don't care. I mean, Congressman, they don't care. Dianne Feinstein's writing letters to Janet Napolitano's DHS saying, don't deport the parents of illegal immigrants. So now it's an emotional argument. Keep the families together. Keep the kids here. Keep the family. Who's left? So it never ends. So the Republicans sitting down with the Democrats thinking they're going to be suddenly loved by the Latinos and other illegal immigrants. The Democrats are just one-upping you guys every step of the way. You get one-upped. And it's a loser proposition, which is why the Republicans should never have gone down this immigration reform road. You got to win back the White House and actually have someone who believes in border enforcement and keeping the wages of the American worker growing, not flatlining because of an influx of cheap labor. But you don't need to hear me on this, Congressman. It's great to have you on. I have a lot of friends who one good friend who works for you, and she adores you. She's one of your gleaming, incredibly successful young staffers.
Lauren does a great job, and she has tried to work with you to get me on the program. Thanks for having me today. Thanks for being the voice that you are out there. And let's just pause to remember the victims on 9/11 in 2001. I remember where I was when I heard the tragedy that happened there, but also thank you for continuing to pound the drum and raise awareness about 1 year ago today that 4 Americans lost their lives in Benghazi.
We will not forget. Congressman Jeff Duncan, South Carolina. We appreciate it. A lot more to get to on the Laura Ingraham Show.